Hey guys, for today's video, I'll be analyzing the enemies in the 5.8 Spiral Abyss and giving y'all advice for how to deal with them to help you full clear floor 12. Starting off with the first phase of the first chamber, there will be a total of 8 basic eremites that will spawn in groups of 2. Thus, most characters will be good since AoE abilities aren't exactly necessary here. Still, you should use characters that have either shields, interruption resistance, or crowd control abilities since these eremites typically have a ton of interruption resistance, which makes it hard to do any damage sometimes because you're getting comboed by them the entire time if you don't have any interruption resistance. Thus, characters like Silali, Baishu, Inefa, Diona, Lanyan, Layla, Qingchuo, Zhongli, and Cylonen will be good here since they provide a type of shield or interruption resistance to allies, and Sucrose, Venti, Jean, or Kazuha will also be good here because they provide crowd control effects, and main DPS characters like Skirk, Varisa, Mavuika, Raiden, Mualani, or Risley will also be good here since their kit gives them interruption resistance. For the other enemies in this chamber, there's going to be up to 4 Spirit of Omen eremites that will spawn individually. These eremites are characterized by their enhanced resistances when their summon is active, so to defeat these enemies, you're gonna want to target their summon first so that once you defeat their summon, you can reduce all of the eremites' resistance and greatly reduce the resistance to their specific elements. For example, there's going to be a total of 2 Dendro and 2 Geo eremites, meaning that after you defeat their summoning, not only will all of their resistances be reduced, but their Dendro and Geo resistances will be heavily reduced, respectively. So you're gonna want some Geo and Dendro DPS on your team, like Navia for the Geo eremites and Kenich, Tenari, and Alhaitham for the Dendro eremites if you want an extra advantage. Still, I wouldn't worry too much about this extra reduction in resistances since other DPS will still do a ton of damage once you defeat the eremites' summon, regardless of what elements their attacks are. Also, the tips for the regular eremites also apply to these eremites, so make sure to use characters that have interruption resistance. Onto the second phase, for the first chamber, the enemies are going to be split into 2 waves, with the first enemy being a fluid avatar of lava and the second wave being the Mountain King. The avatar of lava is characterized by the fact that it has a ton of pyro resistance, but with enough pyro application, you're able to one-shot it. So you're gonna want to use pyro characters, but not for DPS, but for high frequency pyro application. You could use characters with a ton of pyro application like Changling, Toma, or pretty much any character with C6 Bennett. But ideally, you're gonna want to do the burning reaction to apply a ton of pyro, while also doing a ton of dendro damage with characters like Emily or Kenich. Or you can do the burgeon reaction with hydro characters like Furina, Yelang, Jinchuo, or Candice, and pyro characters like Deya, Toma, Mavuika, Changling, or Pyro Traveler. And of course, along with dendro characters like Baishu, Nahida, Yao Yao, or Kirara to do a ton of dendro damage while applying a ton of pyro through the burning reaction. For the second wave, the Mountain King is characterized by its annoying heavy attacks, his movements, and his flame granites. The Mountain King will start off the battle with an ultimate attack in which he shoots 3 fire breaths that do a ton of damage, so you're gonna need a sustainer with the type of shield or healing. Then throughout the battle, he'll create up to 3 flame granites that'll allow him to do these fire breath attacks if consumed, but you can apply pyro onto them to explode them and deal a ton of damage. So for the Mountain King, you're gonna want characters with interruption resistance so that you don't get knocked back by his heavy attacks, supports that amplify your damage without needing your active character to be stuck in circle impact, and pyro characters to explode his flame granites that'll do a ton of damage to him and prevent him from doing a ton of damage to you. Characters like Silali, Baishu, Inefa, Diona, Lanyan, Layla, Qingchuo, Zhongli, and Cylonen will be good here since they provide a type of shield or interruption resistance to all allies. You're also gonna want characters like Ayansan, Cylonen, Kazuha, or Zhongli so that you can move around while keeping your amplifying effects. And pretty much any pyro character will do just fine at triggering the flame granites. For the first phase of the second chamber, we've got 4 ruin scouts, 3 ruin cruisers, and 2 ruin destroyers, in which only 3 enemies will remain on the field. These ruin enemies are characterized by their physical damage resistances, projectiles, constant AoE attacks that do a ton of damage, and can sometimes spawn on top of them or even on you, and teleportation like movements. To combat them, you're gonna want to use characters with projectile-like abilities to oppose them, since no matter where they teleport to and no matter where their AoE attacks spawn in, you'll be able to attack them without being injured. So main DPS characters like Nubilets, Chaska, Kenich, and Navia will be good here, and sub DPS characters like Furina, Escoffier, Yelan, Mavuika, Nahida, Inefa, Emily, Fischl, Raiden, Auroron, Yamiko, or Shiori will also be good here since they have projectile attacks. Also, the electrocharged and lunar charged reaction will also be really good here, along with every other AoE reaction like Hyper Bloom, Burgeon, or Bloom. You could also just get away with using normal attack or single target characters by just using a sustainer that can provide heals and or shields. For the second phase, there's going to be 3 Ruined Drake Earth Guards, which are characterized by their ability to reduce resistances to the specific element that has been applied to them the most. To combat them, you're gonna want to use a dual DPS team comp like myriad with Kanich, Risley, Molani, Verisa, Nuvilat, Chaska, etc., or Skirk with literally any cryo and hydro DPS, so that even if the Ruin Guard resists the element of your main DPS, you can always just use your other one. You can also use a team that has powerful sub DPS that also have a ton of elemental application different from your main DPS's elements. For example, you can use a Vaporize team with Furina and Yelan to force the Drake Earth Guard to resist Hydro, while your Pyro characters can continue to do a ton of damage through the Vaporize reaction. You can also use a Bloom reaction based team in which you use a variation of teammates that all contribute a ton of differing elemental application. For example, in a Burgeon team, you can have your Pyro and Dendro characters inflict burn onto the enemy, which will cause the Ruin Guard to gain a resistance to Pyro, rather than Dendro, which will be this team's primary source of damage. Or the Ruin Drake can gain a resistance to Hydro, and you'll still be able to do Burgeon damage without problem. Or you could just use a bow character so that you can stop them from triggering their ultimate attack, which will also remove their elemental resistance so that you won't have to worry about any complicated team building. For the second phase of the second chamber, we've got one Pyro Wayob in the first wave. Wayobs are characterized by having elemental resistances to their respective elements and forcing you into a trial in which they absorb the energy of all of your allies and prevent them from gaining any energy until you destroy their shield. During this trial, your allies will get a 120% damage boost, and Naito aligned attacks get an additional 60% damage boost. If you're able to destroy the Wayob's shield during the trial, the Wayob is stunned. Your damage increase goes away, and all of your allies get 90 energy each. However, if you cannot destroy their shield, the Wayob will gain an elemental shield equal to the remaining amount of shield it had before the trial ended, meaning that you can now do more damage to the shield through specific elemental application, since it'll cause an elemental reaction that will reduce the elemental shield. For example, against the Dendro Wayob, my Dendro attacks will do little damage, but when he starts the trial, my overall damage will be significantly increased, especially if my damage is Naito aligned. Now I can hope to break the shield right then and there and gain 90 energy, but if I can't, I can always apply Pyro onto the now Dendro shield so that I can trigger the burning reaction and get rid of it extremely quickly. So for the Pyro Wayob, you're gonna want either Natlink characters that aren't Pyro to just power through the initial shield, or you can wait out the trial and use Hydro characters like Furina, Yelan, Jinchou, Nuvilat, etc. to easily destroy its Pyro shield. For the second wave, we've got a Jade Plume Terror Shroom, which is characterized by their activation states. The Jade Plume has an activation gauge that increases with electro application and catalyzed reactions like aggravate or spread, and decreases with pyro application while also having Dendro resistance. If you apply electro or do the catalyzed reactions to trigger their activation states, their attacks will become more aggressive. They will continue to do aggressive attacks until they're weakened and their resistances are reduced. But if you apply pyro, he will become scorched, take very little dot damage, and produce spores in an effort to get rid of the states. So characters with AoE attacks will be good at stopping the spores after they spawn, and pyro characters will also be good because they one-shot them before they even spawn. Also, you're gonna want to avoid using Dendro characters for your main and sub DPS slots and focus on using them as Dendro applicators for the catalyzed reactions. You're also gonna want to use electro characters like Saino, Clorinde, Inefa, Raiden, Yaimiko, Fischl, Auroron, etc., while also avoiding pyro applicators like Mavuika, Gaming, Toma, Deya, Changling, etc., because triggering the scorched reaction does very little to benefit you and only gets in the way of being able to trigger the Jade Plume's activation state. Also, keep in mind that after triggering one of the states, the same state has a cooldown before you can use it again. Also, like a lot of other bosses, you're gonna want some interruption resistance because of their aggressive attacks that also cause them to move a lot. So characters with shields or interruption resistance will be good here, and characters that amplify your damage without needing your active character to stay in one spot will also be good here. For the first phase of the third chamber, we've got the last survivor of Thx Sitok, who is characterized by their swapping hats that they hide in like a whack-a-mole. You're gonna want to use electro and lunar charged reactions because they take 300% increased damage from those reactions. Their elemental resistances are all reduced except for hydro and electro resistances. Inflicting electro or lunar charge stops them from switching hats temporarily, and once you destroy the hats they're hiding in, their resistances will all be reduced and they'll take damage based on how much electro or lunar charge damage they took while they were in the hat. So you're gonna want to use hydro and electro characters as well as AoE characters if possible, so that you can apply hydro and electro to all of their switching hats and pause their switching, or you can just follow their hat swapping and beat them up when you find them. For the second phase of the third chamber, we're gonna have a secret source automaton, which is characterized by its increased resistances until it does its ultimate. You're gonna need a character with exploration mechanics like Zhongli, Albedo, Venti, Kanich, Mavuika, Ororon, Silatli, Kazuha, etc., because you're gonna want to climb onto the two pillars and destroy the cores to reduce the automaton's HP by 15% and all of its resistances. You're also gonna want Natlin characters because Naito aligned ultimates help its ultimate trigger faster, which will allow you to weaken it faster. But if you don't have any exploration mechanic characters, you'll probably just have to end up using a really bad character like Geo Traveler to try and parkour, because if you don't weaken them, you'll need a really powerful shield to survive their ultimate attack. For general team comps, considering that the first phases get electro and lunar charged damage buffs, you're gonna want to use a dedicated electro charged or lunar charged team filled with hydro and electro characters like Nubilat, Furina, Yelan, Jinchuo, Ororon, Fischl, Yaemiko, Clorinde, Varisa, Sino, Raiden, and Inefa, who is gonna be an amazing pick. Now, although charged based teams are going to be crucial for the first phase because of its buff, AoE capabilities, and because of the last boss, you can always get away with using a good electro or hydro DPS in a Hyper Bloom or Burgeon team, which will be good against the Dendro Eremites for the second wave in the first chamber. You can also just get away with using Overload, Vaporize, Overvape, or even Freeze teams to still do a ton of damage, since really only the last chamber has a boss that wants charge based teams but doesn't even need charge based teams. And you're gonna want a bow user for the second wave of the second chamber if you don't want to play Vape, Melt, Charged, or Bloom teams, aka teams that apply a ton of application of an element that is different from your main source of damage. And like I said, you're gonna want a sustainer as well, since a lot of these enemies are known to do a ton of damage and heavy attacks. So DPS characters with interruption resistance, or at least the character that provides interruption resistance, will be good because it'll help you from rage quitting against the Eremites and the Ruins. For the second phase, you can use Naito characters to gain 75% more damage and to beat the last boss and the way up in the second chamber far quicker, since the last boss's weakened states can be triggered faster through Naito ultimates, and the way up takes 60% additional damage from Naito aligned attacks. You can also use at least one pyro character to help you out against the Mountain King and the Avatar of Lava, since the Mountain King takes a ton of damage when you explode his flame granite with pyro, and the Avatar of Lava can be killed with enough pyro application, though it is resistant to pyro, so I'd recommend using a Dendro character along with the pyro character to trigger the burning reaction, or just use pyro applicators rather than a pyro main DPS. For the Jade Plume, using an electro character will help you beat it far easier, since it'll allow you to reach their activation states, thus their weakened state quicker. So I would recommend using overload teams with an electro main DPS, because if you use a pyro main DPS, you'll have a hard time against the Avatar of Lava. I would also recommend using a Hyper Bloom team with a pyro character, because against the Mountain King, pyro application will be really helpful. A Burgeon team with an electro character would also be beneficial, since you're gonna need an electro character to activate the activated states for the Jade Plume. And of course, you're gonna want to use Natlin characters to beat the final boss faster, do 60% additional damage to the way up, and obtain that 75% damage boost for the second phase of each chamber. Anyways, I hope this guide will help you full clear floor 12. If you've enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. If you have anything to say, I would greatly appreciate it. Goodbye.